Good morning. JB here, JB here. Hope everyone's doing outstanding. Thursday, March 13th, 8:59. On this fine morning, talk quick about the market. Some names I'm looking at, go from there. S&P futures kind of slightly in the red. NASDAQ futures down about 0.3%. S&P futures down 0.2%. And small caps are down about 0.1%. Uh, Overnight, markets were lower. Then we bounced into the 8 o'clock or so, and then melted all the way to lows in the early morning, and then bounced into the green. Now we've kind of been chopping around. We got tariff headlines again. I guess announced from Trump, or at least they're looking at possibly liquor tariffs, right, on wine and liquor out of Europe. It's giving me flashbacks of 2016 or whatever it is when we were doing cheeses and wines. So it just so there's that, and then this morning we got the PPI data, which after yesterday's CPI data probably doesn't take as much importance, but PPI is kind of like a more backward looking, like it more line of sight because it's taking before the goods are in front of the consumer. So those were substantially lower than expectations. The month over month was negative 0.1%, and estimates were for positive 0.2%. And then the year over year was 3.2% versus 3.3 estimate. So just another data point that I guess hopefully alleviates or allays some concerns, at least short term, what's going on with possible inflation worries. But I think if anything was yesterday was an example of it, is that the uncertainty part of this equation is still there. Until the uncertainty goes away, it's probably going to be unfortunately, a choppy trading environment. And I can't rule out, but we might have more lows. But for me, I think the probability right now is that the odds of a bounce, or at least a short-term bounce, are certainly improving. Yesterday, the RSI was under 30. That hasn't happened in a couple of years. You start looking at some of the oversold conditions, some of the individual names, and there's pinchers and pinchers. I don't know if you see charts, but rarely do you see it on an index. But the SPY, the IWM, all have somewhat setting up as pinchers, which usually large oversold conditions that have large reversals very quickly, shortly thereafter. So whether that's this week, today, tomorrow, or next week, at some point there's going to be a large bounce. So I mean, nothing's guaranteed, but that's kind of what I'm leaning towards. So we'll see how things all play. I'm still open to playing both sides of the equation. Still open to getting some puts on weakness. That 555 handle was the low on Tuesday. I think on Monday. No, Tuesday. No, Monday. Then it bounced off that Tuesday. So that's a big spot I'm looking at. And then on the flip side, that 563 October level, uh, like magic, found resistance on it yesterday. So want to see that. If that gets breached, then you start looking at that 200-day moving average again, and maybe short-term bounces in the cards. I always say, well, I was saying it last week too. It's a lot of the market is passive money, right? Other people's money, the 401ks, the pension funds, ETFs. Money's always coming into the market. It's just a matter of the selling. So if some selling pressure alleviates the path of least resistance to the upside. But we'll see. I'm not ruling out. I'm not getting my bullhorns on, but I do think that there's the odds of possibility of more of a bounce than downside. And then you also take a look at the VIX, and the VIX was down 10% yesterday, down under 24. And you take a look where the VIX was over 23 in October, it was over 23 in September. And people are like, oh, we need the VIX to come down for the market around. Like the market was higher then. So just funny how that all works. Other things I'm looking at, that 200-day and 50-day moving average on the SPY. The Again, similar situation here. The amount of stocks trading above their 50-day moving average is still above levels at the start of January. So you could speak that a little bit to market breadth. Does that mean there's more downside to come, more opportunities? I don't read too much into that. But then on the negative side here, the amount of stocks trading above their 200-day moving average dipped again yesterday. So maybe got to see that trend change a little bit before I get a little too excited. All right, so that's kind of like overall markets and some individual names with the markets gapping on that CPI data yesterday. I was able to get some of my Arista calls out for close to 100%, and then sure enough, it reversed course under $80, bounced a little bit, still closed up 1%. This morning, Goldman Spectacular adjusted their price target of 130 from 145. I don't know about the rest of my strikes. Going to need a big move, but if the market bounces, Arista could be up 5-6% today, 5-6% tomorrow. If it does show strength, I might look for some calls into next week. especially if there's going to be a bounce. If there's a bounce, I can see it trading mid 80s and then possibly into the 90s. This morning reports out that Baidu's working with Tesla on their self-driving in China. I guess their maps. Right after the news, Baidu spiked almost up to $97, has since come down, trading at 93.50. Still in the green. 95.75 is the key spot. I think if that breaks, I might look for some more strikes on top of my calls into next week, because I think it's pretty much a collision course with $100. So that's Baidu. Other names, Caterpillar remains stubborn, back-to-back rough session. I mean, it was large candle yesterday, but only down 0.5%. At some point, it's going to break out if the market bounces. So I might look for some more strikes there in Caterpillar. With the market reversing yesterday, or not reversing, it went red to green at about 11 o'clock yesterday morning and then bounced. I was looking for some bounce plays, and ROKU was on the list. It started to show some signs back over its 200-day moving average. It's down from $85 over the past 5 sessions, down under 70. If there's a possibility for at least a short-term bounce, I think it trades into the 76 plus range. So got some spec calls there. We'll see how that plays out. And then other news, Intel, which I was watching before the big move up to $27, missed on it. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. Not saying I should have added some Intel calls, but it's gapping here this morning after announcement. Finally, they got a new CEO. Lip-Bu Tan, I believe is how you pronounce it, was the CEO of Candidates. That stock used to be nothing, and he was able to work that back into a great story. He was actually on the board of directors on Intel back in the summer. I guess he had a spat with the previous leadership. I think he was pushing for a spinoff of some of the assets. That didn't happen. And now that he's been appointed, you have to think that there's going to be some headlines. I don't know. It might take some time, but yeah, the sum of parts valuation on Intel is substantially higher than where it trades right now, right? So I think if you take all the parts away, it's a $35 to $40 stock. And that's outside of all the other possibilities if there's some turnaround. So not saying it's a huge growth story or whatever, but I think there's like a dislocation with the market. And when you see that, I think that means opportunity. So don't be surprised if I add some strikes on Intel for a move over 25 and beyond. And then other names. And, I keep putting TKO, and there's a little channel in the chat room now for bounce plays, bounce ideas. TKO, I think that trades back to highs. I mean, $180 stock back in February. It's not going to do it overnight, but could be a nice, slow and steady mover. It's actually held its ground the last 2 sessions. I think that bodes well. And again, it was added to the S&P on Friday, or at least that was the announcement. And then my old friend VKTX, which I've been absolutely, I wouldn't call it obliterated, but I guess you would when it's $80 stock back in November, all the way down under $30. I thought it had some good news on Tuesday in regards to an agreement for production, which will help alleviate some headwinds when they do eventually have a drug to market. But a lot of folks took that as, hey, that's not an M&A possibility. So if that removed that, so the stock sold off, but now you start looking, it was breaking almost 30 in the after hours. It looks like maybe it's going to bounce. So $35, 33.01 is the 50-day moving average. I was actually looking for some spec calls yesterday. Don't be surprised if I add some on, I don't know if I'll do weeklies or maybe monthlies. Yeah, so the Mobileye, gosh, I remember then when they acquired that. They might spin off some assets. I don't know which of them, right? But I just know even just a hint of the spin-offs, I think is good enough for the stock to really start to take off. And there was rumors of that before. There was rumors of M&A. So there's been a lot of rumors back there. So I just think if you take a look at the sum of parts, it's a 30 plus stock at least. So when I think of that, then I think there's opportunity to make some money on the call. So I'll be looking at the open. I don't want to chase the premium ramp at the open because there'll obviously be a bump in the premiums. Maybe I'll wait till 10:30 and then look to possibly add some strikes there on Intel. And that's it, folks. Let's have a great day. I'll be back on audio later. Rock and roll.